It's time to pull your socks up and start studying because in this week's podcast, you'll learn 19 useful idioms connected to clothes so that you can expand your vocabulary and improve your English, whatever you're wearing. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig.
Hello, and if you're a new listener to the podcast, you're very, very welcome. And if you've come back for more, thank you very much for being with us. The aim of this podcast is to help you with your English and take it up to the next level. How are you, Reza?
I'm fine. How are you doing, Craig?
I'm very well, thank you. Looking forward to podcasting again this week about idioms. But first of all, what is an idiom?
Wow, that's a good question because I hear so many, particularly Spanish speakers, get that word wrong. They think, oh, it's got to be like that Spanish word, idioma. No, it isn't, I'm afraid. Looks like it, but it isn't. That's a false friend. It's a false connection. An idiom is not a language. An idiom is a group of words that have a meaning that's different from the meaning of the individual words. In other words, it's not the real, true, original meaning. It's a special meaning. For example, over the moon. Well, it's true that a rocket could fly over the moon, but when people say day to day, oh, I'm over the moon, I've passed my exam, they're not talking about rockets in space. They're just talking about the fact that they're really happy. So there's no moon involved in this situation. It's just a use of the word moon to give a particular meaning, but we're not really talking about the moon. That's an idiom. Another one could be see the light. Well, if you turn a light on and I look at it, yes, you could say that I see a light, but we don't normally mean that when we say see the light. It means to finally understand something or to have an inspirational idea or thought or belief. For example, imagine I was a very bad man. It's difficult to imagine, isn't it, listeners? But imagine I was a very bad man. I did bad things. I drank too much. I was a terrible person. Then I saw the light. And I realized that by being a good person and going to church every day would save my soul. You could say that I saw the light. I saw that my life had to change and I had to have this new belief and this new way of living. So nobody turned on a light. It's not a question of electricity and a light bulb. It's a question of being inspired in a new way. So we're using the word light in a special way, like we use the word moon in a special way. So the words don't have their original true meaning. They have a metaphorical meaning.
So that's what an idiom is, and I'm over the moon to be presenting with Reza 19 idioms all connected to clothes in the hope that you will see the light and learn to use these idioms in everyday conversation. But before we start with idiom number one, Reza, do you mind putting on some clothes? Because it's a bit distracting for me podcasting with you on the other side of the desk completely naked.
Yes, sorry about that, listeners. This podcast has involved some nudity, but I will now cover up because I don't want to distract Craig any further.
And if my wife comes in, I'm sure you'll get dressed at the drop of a hat. What does that mean, at the drop of the hat? You're not literally dropping your hat, are you?
No, I don't even have a hat. In fact, I don't have anything on at all. But at the drop of a hat means without hesitation. So forget about an actual physical hat because it's an idiom, right? So the words don't have the true meaning. It just means that you do something quickly, without thinking too much, without hesitation. Craig, can you give us an example sentence with that idiom?
Yes, in the USA, people often file lawsuits at the drop of the hat. They will take you to court. I remember I was in New York and I went in to buy some coffee and a donut. And the person who took my money, who was serving me, said, "Have a nice day." And I didn't, so I sued him. So people file lawsuits at the drop of a hat without hesitation. Reza, would you go to Costa Rica to see the sloths if you had the chance?
At the drop of a hat. As you all know, I love sloths, so I don't have to think about it. My answer is immediately yes, at the drop of a hat.
Another idiom with the word hat is to take your hat off to someone. You can probably remember seeing films years ago in England when many gentlemen had big, tall hats that are called top hats, and if they see a lady in the street, they would raise their hat or take their hat off to acknowledge a lady. Well, the use of this idiom is to acknowledge someone's achievement or someone's skill. For example, I take my hat off to you, Reza, for your knowledge of grammar and your patience with teaching children. I take my hat off to you.
Because Craig, he's not so keen on teaching children.
No patience.
He admires people who do. I don't teach them very well, but at least I try.
Can you think of another example with to take your hat off to someone?
Yeah, here's one. I don't like Peter that much, but I take my hat off to him when it comes to planning events. He's meticulous. So I take my hat off to him. I admire him. Maybe I don't like him, but I admire that skill he has. I take my hat off to him when it comes to means in terms of planning events. He's very good at that.
And staying on the theme, on the topic of hats, one type of hat is a cap. For example, a baseball cap, the American style baseball cap. If you put your thinking cap on, you think very hard about something. You're really thinking and strategizing and thinking deeply about something, especially if you need to find a solution to a problem. For example, Reza and I really have to put on our thinking caps to come up with new ideas, to come up with means to think of, to invent or think of things. So we really need to put our thinking caps on when we create these episodes. So if you have any ideas, please let us know. Can you think of another example with the expression to put your thinking cap on?
Let me see. In fact, I'm going to put my thinking cap on now. I've got to think hard. Yes, obviously we need to solve the problem of global warming because it's just getting worse. Governments really have to put their thinking cap on and come up with new solutions now. They've got to put their thinking cap on right now.
Before we go from caps and hats down the body to shirts, let's stay with one more idiom that I've just thought of, and that's to wear different hats. So if you're in a job, maybe you don't do the same tasks every single day. Maybe one day you have to market a product. One day you have to record a podcast. Another day you have to write a blog post. You're wearing different hats. You have different skills. So maybe you're wearing your marketing hat on one day, or maybe you're wearing your public relations hat. So wearing a hat can also mean idiomatically doing different job tasks.
Let's move on to another item of clothing, the shirt. To keep your shirt on. Well, that could mean simply that you don't take your shirt off because you don't want to be topless. But we're not talking about that here. We're talking about idioms. So the metaphorical, the idiomatic use of keep your shirt on is to remain calm and wait for something. Like imagine if I said to Craig, all right, keep your shirt on, Craig. The chocolate cake will be here soon enough.
I can't wait. I need sugar. I need chocolate. I'm really getting tense. I'm really getting upset about this. I need some chocolate quickly.
You see, I'm trying to calm him down, yeah, because he has the coffee, but the cake hasn't arrived yet. Keep your shirt on, Craig. It's coming. It's coming.
Or imagine I spill coffee on Reza's lovely, clean, white shirt that he bought yesterday. He might get very angry. And I'll say, keep your shirt on, Reza. It's only coffee. It'll come out in the wash. It's only coffee. Keep your shirt on.
Craig, let's move to a particular part of the shirt now, the sleeve. Or you can also say the arm. You don't have to actually say the word sleeve. Yeah, you can say the arm of a shirt, right? The sleeve or the arm, the bit where you put your arm. We got a nice expression with that. To wear your heart on your sleeve. Craig, do you wear your heart on your sleeve?
I think I do, yeah. I don't hide my emotions very easily. I tend to communicate how I feel, and I wear my heart on my sleeve. It's very easy to see how I'm feeling, especially about things related to the heart, romance and love and those kind of things.
So Craig doesn't really hide his feelings well publicly.
What about you?
Sometimes. It depends who I'm with. With people that I know, yeah. But with people that I don't, then I tend to hide my true feelings.
Let's stay with the shirt, because if you follow the sleeve, S-L-E-V-E, if you follow the sleeve where your heart is, idiomatically, and you go down to the bottom, you get to the cuff, C-U-F-F. That's right at the end of the shirt sleeve. And the expression to say something off the cuff means to remark and say something casually and spontaneously, without planning or preparation. Now, we hope we are fairly natural when we're speaking on this podcast, but it's not completely off the cuff. We're speaking from a list of idioms that we have prepared previously, and we are speaking off the cuff, but we're keeping to the plan of the podcast. So off the cuff means speaking without any plan and being completely spontaneous. Can you think of an example?
What, off the cuff?
Off the cuff.
Oh, he hasn't given me time to prepare. Yeah, what about this? The Prime Minister's off-the-cuff remarks to the press have been getting him into a lot of trouble. So as you know, politicians tend to have everything scripted, but occasionally they go off script and they say things off the cuff, and that's when they tend to say silly things and get into trouble, when they go off the cuff.
Speaking of that expression off the cuff, that reminds me of something that I think you might find useful. If you use Facebook and you search for the community called The Chat Box, there's a guy there called Roberto from Italy who organizes activities and tasks called To Speak Off the Cuff. And the way it works is that there's a long list of topics, and each topic has a number. And you choose a number, and then when you find the topic, and it could be cars, or it could be holidays abroad, or it could be shopping, or it could be religion, then you need to speak about that subject off the cuff, which is very good practice for your fluency. So it's a list of random topics. You record yourself on video and speak off the cuff. So if that sounds something you'd like to participate in, go to the chat box and speak off the cuff without preparation.
Now, we've been talking about shirts. We've been talking about the whole shirt. We've been talking about the sleeve. We've been talking about the cuff. Some shirts have frills. Not many, but some do. And some don't have any frills. What are frills, Craig?
Frills would be fancy, very exaggerated piece of cloth or silk or something very flamboyant and showy and noticeable that's on the shirt. I remember years ago when my dad used to dress up to go to a special formal evening. He used to wear a frilly shirt, because frilly is the adjective. It's describing the shirt. And he would wear a bow tie and maybe a pink frilly shirt or a white frilly shirt. And these frills were down the front of the shirt where the buttons come together, and it just looks very fancy and quite formal as well.
Yes, you don't see it much these days, occasionally, but it was very much in fashion for men in the
80s, 70s?
70s, 80s, yeah, to have formal frilly shirts. So a shirt with frills down the front, but now it looks a bit dated, to be honest.
Did you have a frilly shirt?
I did, yes. When I was a teenager in the 1980s.
Do you still have it?
Yes, I still do. It wouldn't fit me. I mean, like a shirt I got when I'm 16 is going to fit me today. No way. But I still have it because it was still in fashion now, because I went to the school the formal ball and party. So even then in the 1980s, you could still wear a frilly shirt for a formal event and not be laughed at. Now it might raise a few eyebrows.
Which means that people would be surprised.
Look at him. What a dandy, they would think, you know? So this word frills, then the material which is added, we got the expression from it, with all the frills. So if you got a shirt with all the frills, obviously it's very noticeable. Yeah, so metaphorically, it means with added perks, added benefits, with all the luxuries. Here's an example sentence. Not only does his job pay $100,000 a year, but it also comes with all the frills, like a generous expenses budget, expensive company car, free worldwide health insurance. He's got all the frills, all the added luxuries.
So what are some of the frills attached to your job at the language school?
Corrections at 2:00 in the morning. Not everybody gets them in their jobs, do they?
Free pens? You get a free pen?
Free pen, free rubber, I should say, eraser, pencils, that type of thing. Yeah.
Of course, the opposite, if something is very basic, if there are no added luxuries or bonuses, then you can say no frills. So I bought a really cheap flight to Dublin with an Irish no frills airline. So there's no baggage allowance. You have to stand up on the flight. You can't use the toilet. You have to push the plane to get it started. No frills. No frills whatsoever. Very, very basic.
We're not naming the company, but I wonder what company it could be. An Irish no frills airline. Who could it be?
Have a guess. I remember once I went to stay in a no frills hotel, and it was very cheap and it was basic, but it was clean. And they gave you the sheets when you arrived at reception, and you had to make your own bed. So that was very no-frills hotel.
You know what? I'm not completely against that idea, because then you know they're clean.
Yeah.
I can see a good side to that.
But you wouldn't expect at a hotel to make your own bed. So, no frills. But yeah, it was quite good and very, very cheap as well.
Well, I presume the sheets were clean. It would be quite something if they gave you dirty sheets and you had to make the bed with them. That would be even beyond no frills.
Or even if the sheets were hanging by a thread, Thread. What would that mean, to be hanging by a thread? If your life, for example, is hanging by a thread.
Well, all material, clothing and sheets and things like that are made out of threads. So that very, very, very fine fiber, which gets sewn, put together, will make the material. So can you imagine that something is hanging, hang is colgar, just from a thread, un hilo? And if it falls, you're going to die. So, wow, that's a really, really, really dangerous situation, because the thread is not going to support the weight of something for very long. So it's a very dangerous, very precarious state, and it could go badly wrong at any second, and nobody would be surprised. Can you think of an example?
Well, in this cancel culture that we're living in these days, if you tweet something on Twitter that could offend somebody, or if you make some comment on a social media platform that some people don't like, your career can be hanging by a thread. So you get cancelled, you can't get any more work because people think you are racist or they think you are sexist, so they don't want to employ you. Your career could be hanging by a thread, a very precarious situation. So sometimes your career can be hanging by a thread because you've made certain comments on social media that maybe hit someone below the belt and they take offense. Because if you hit someone below the belt, you're not physically hitting them. You're being insulting and unfair to the person. Can you think of an example off the cuff, Reza?
What about this? During the divorce, my wife hit me below the belt with some unfair comments about my social drinking habits. So she didn't physically hit me. No, she made a comment that was very insulting. It wasn't fair. She tried to imply that I was an alcoholic or something, and that's not at all true. So it was below the belt. It's hurtful. She knows that I try to drink less because maybe I've drunk a bit more than I should. So that was below the belt. She shouldn't have used that to insult me. Below the belt. It comes from boxing. Because in boxing, you're not allowed to hit below the belt. If you do that, that's not accepted. Yeah,
it's illegal.
You could virtually kill the other person, hitting them in the face, the kidneys, the arms, but you cannot hit them below the belt. That's not accepted.
Well, that's where the genitalia are. But you came in today and you said to me, Craig, I see you've recently had a haircut. What does your hairdresser do for a living? And then you said, when is your hairdresser going to finish your haircut? I thought those comments were a bit below the belt, to be honest.
Oh, come on, Craig. I was only joking.
Speaking of belts that hopefully hold your trousers up so that they don't fall down, what's the idiom to tighten your belt? What does that mean?
Well, let's spell tighten, T-I-G-H-T-E-N. So tight is an adjective and tighten is the verb from the adjective. If you tighten something, you make it tighter, you make it more compact, more close together, not loose. So if you tighten your belt because your trousers are falling down, then it will stay up and they won't fall down. You might have to tighten your belt if you've lost a lot of weight. So metaphorically, what it means is to adjust to a more modest lifestyle. Just like you adjust your belt because you're now thinner than you used to be. Yeah, you don't eat so much. If you have to metaphorically tighten your belt, it means now you've got to live more modestly. Every 5 or 10 years or so, there's some kind of economic crisis. We're in one at the moment. But by the time you're listening to this, you might be out of one, but I'm sure you'll be back in one 5 years later because it goes in cycles. So at the minute on the news, politicians are always talking about, oh, yes, the economy, there's a war in Europe, fuel prices. We all have to tighten our belts. We'll all have to spend less money. Be careful what we spend. Yeah.
And of course, if you tighten your belt and you don't eat in as many restaurants, then you probably will have to physically tighten your belt because you'll lose weight.
Yeah, imagine I say to you, I've lost my job and I've no income. I need to tighten my belt and stop eating in a fancy restaurant. It means, I can't spend the money. But you might physically have to do it as well as metaphorically, as Craig says.
Now, belts are used, as I said, to keep your trousers up so that your trousers don't fall down. And men and women wear belts and trousers. But to wear the trousers idiomatically means the person who is in charge, usually in a relationship. So who wears the trousers in your relationship?
Me.
You are the dominant person. You're the alpha male in your relationship. You say what happens, you wear the trousers.
What about you? What about in your house?
Well, generally speaking, I think men like to think they wear the trousers, and it's usually the women who wear the trousers. In my experience and in my relationship, I definitely think it's the woman who wears the trousers. But don't tell her. It's a secret between the two of us.
Metaphorically, could we say that you're more like the wearer of a miniskirt in the relationship?
That's a horrible image to give the listeners, Reza.
It's true. I can't get out of my head now.
Me in a miniskirt is probably the worst image you could give. You have to pull your socks up and improve your image on this audio. What does to pull your socks up mean?
So when your socks go down, right, it doesn't look good. You just look a bit lazy, like you haven't paid attention to every little detail. So, metaphorically, idiomatically, to pull your socks up means to make an effort to improve your work, make it perfect, give a perfect performance, or have better behavior. For example, imagine your boss says to you at work, if you don't pull your socks up before the end of the year, you won't get a Christmas bonus. So he or she wants you to work harder, sell more, get more money coming into the company. You'd better pull your socks up.
My dad used to constantly say that to me when he got a school report about my performance in school. Say, Craig, my dad would say, Craig, you really have to pull your socks up. Otherwise, you won't get any Christmas presents this year. Speaking of socks, if I say to you, Reza, put a sock in it, what am I saying? Where do I want you to put the sock exactly?
Well, not really anywhere because it's idiomatic. But if you can imagine, I'm talking too much. If I put a sock in my mouth, that would stop me talking, wouldn't it? So to put a sock in it basically means stop talking.
Shut up.
So it's said by one person to another. So imagine I'm listening to people talking loudly late at night. They're irritating me. And I might say to them, are you still chattering at midnight? Put a sock in it, please, and go to sleep. So put a sock in it, be quiet, stop talking.
That's quite difficult, that pronunciation. Put a sock in it. Put a sock in it. Put a sock in it. A similar expression is to zip it. Z-I-P, to zip it. Also means to stop talking, but what's a zip? Z-I-P. Well, you can close a jacket or your trousers with buttons, or you can close them with a zip. And a zip, if you zip your jacket up, then you close both sides of your jacket. You also have zips on bags and rucksacks, for example. So if you zip your mouth, or the expression is zip it, that means to stop talking. For example, hey, loudmouth, shut up, will you? Just zip it.
I would say that one is more common in American English, would you? Than put a sock in it. It means more or less the same, but you're more likely to hear zip it in America and put a sock in it in the UK. Would you agree?
Yes, but it's also worth mentioning that a zip in US English is probably called a zipper. Z-I-P-P-E-R. I think that's more common in the US to say a zipper.
Yeah.
But the expression zip it, I'm not sure if it's more American, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was. Have you ever forgotten to zip up your trousers before teaching a class?
I have a couple of times.
Have you really?
Yeah. Not often, but once or twice. Have you not? Has it never happened to you?
I always check my zip. It's one thing I do whenever I go out to speak in public or teach a class, unless I'm on Zoom, of course. But usually I zip up. Yeah, I check my zip.
Well, when I'm on Zoom, I have a good look at my slippers and my pajamas, which I'll probably be wearing in the class from below the belt, if I'm wearing anything at all.
I think you need to pull your socks up. That's just not up to the standard, Rez. I'm sorry.
Let's stay with the foot for the minute, but not the sock. What you can put over that, the shoe. Craig, can you think of any good idiomatic expressions about shoes?
If the shoe's on the other foot, that means the situation has changed and the situation is the opposite to what it was before. For example, when I was younger, when my sister was younger, I always asked my sister for advice. But now the shoe's on the other foot and she asks me for advice. So when the situation changes and it becomes the opposite, you can say the shoe's on the other foot.
Another common idiom with shoe is to be in someone's shoes. So not your own, but someone else's shoes. And it means to be in the situation, usually it's a difficult situation, that another person is in. For example, imagine Mike's done something bad. I might say, I wouldn't like to be in Mike's shoes when the boss hears what he's done. So I don't want to be in his position. I don't want to be in Mike's shoes.
And as we record this podcast, unfortunately, there are quite a few wars going on in the world. There's a lot of starvation, people losing their homes and suffering. I would not like to be in their shoes. I really have a lot of sympathy for them. Speaking of shoes and footwear, at the back of a shoe or a boot, you have something called a heel. H-E-E-L. And if you dig your heels in, that means to resist something stubbornly, to really refuse to give in. So you've got a very firm no, I'm not going to do this. You are digging in your heels. For example, I was offered €5,500 for my car, but I'm digging my heels in and I'm holding out for €6,000. So I'm not going to accept anything less than €6,000. I'm digging my heels in.
I think we've got time for just one more idiomatic expression with clothes. If you don't mind, we're going to go down a level. By that, I mean we've been talking about the clothes on the outside, but let's have a look at the underwear.
Underwear. Now the podcast gets interesting.
Oh, suddenly we've had a spike. The number of listeners has gone up.
Is that why you're wearing knickers?
Can you see that? Oh, no, there's no video. Thank goodness. Here I am in my knickers.
Pink knickers.
Pink knickers. 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 So I may be standing here in nothing but knickers, but that's a bit odd. Usually
Very odd.
Very odd. It's a good thing you can't see it. Knickers are usually only worn by women. So underwear, that kind of small, quite small type of underwear that many women wear, knickers. And we have an expression in English, an idiomatic expression, to get your knickers in a twist. So can you imagine, ladies, if your knickers, your underwear, are not quite sitting the way they should be, that something's happened to them and they're not in the right place? It would be very uncomfortable, wouldn't it? So the expression to get your knickers in a twist means to become upset or annoyed. But it means specifically unnecessarily. So let me give you an example. Imagine the situation. Imagine my brother's watching the TV and he's watching a really stupid program and the volume's on really loud and it's irritating me. So I go over and without saying a word to him, I just turn the volume down on the TV. And he shouts at me, says, "Hey, what are you doing? I was watching that. This is fantastic." And I say to him, "Hey, don't shout at me. Just because I turned the TV volume down a bit, don't get your knickers in a twist about it." In other words, I'm saying it's not so important. There's no need to get angry about it. Don't get your knickers in a twist. I just turned the volume down. If you want, I'll turn it up again. Don't get your knickers in a twist about it.
We don't want you to get your knickers in a twist, but we would like you to practice your English. Now, we've been speaking English for probably too long, and now it's your turn. The shoe is on the other foot. We would like you to send us a voice message. So put on your thinking cap and try to come up with an idea for a future episode, or send us an email with some expressions that you've heard on this podcast and practice these idioms. You can send us your audio message via the SpeakPipe program. That's SpeakPipe, speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast.
If you want, you could write an email. You could send it to craig@inglespodcast.com or belfastreza@gmail.com.
And if you'd like some paid courses to help you with your English, go to store.mentioningles.net.
As at the end of every podcast, we'd like to take a minute just to thank those people who support us through the Patreon scheme. That's spelled Patreon. And what those people do is they help us. They give us money. They donate as little as $1.20 per month as a way of saying thanks for the podcast. And we say thanks back to them by giving them access to the recent audio transcriptions so they can see all the words that we use in the podcast. We'd like to thank every single Patreon sponsor who does that, but we haven't got time. So what we usually do is just thank the most recent sponsors who've joined us. Who are they, Craig?
They are Rosa Ayalon, Gerard, Javier Correa Zambade, Silvia, Victoria Romera, Martin Arista, Michaela, Antonio Garcia, who is paying more than the minimum amount of $1.20, and also thanks to Juancho Cuyas, who is a long-time Patreon but has recently increased his donation. Thank you, Juancho, and everybody who is supporting us on Patreon. Now, Reza, next week I think we're going to speak about something that students can do if they want to pull their socks up and get to C2 proficiency level. What's next week?
Next week is how to reach a C2 proficiency level of English with Fabio from FabioSerpolini.com.
Yes, look forward to that next week. Myself and Fabio. Reza won't be with us, but he will be back in 2 weeks. So until next time, thank you so much for listening. It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later. And if you got some value from this podcast, please tell your friends so that more people can listen to us.